Greetings, beloveds. This is Amy Karen Johnson, or Cosmic Earth Amy, here with you today with part 2 of a 3-part series about the gates of the Crown Center. I showed you in my last video what I'm talking about in terms of the Crown Center. It is very much, especially in this case, representing the crown chakra. However, through human design, we add the gates, the 3 gates, which correspond to hexagrams from the I Ching. And so the gate we're going to focus on today is the 63rd gate. The 63rd gate, in many ways, is related to the left brain, which most of you probably know connects through the spine to the nerves on the right side of our bodies. So I will talk a bit more about that in a moment, but for now, I do associate each gate with a plant of some kind. In this case, I have chosen the redwood to represent the 63rd gate, and I have also written a poem, so I will share that with you first. Redwood towers without building, sending vapors to the skies. Within a fiery core, fuels growing, adorning structures, catching eyes. So one of the really cool things that I found recently, realized about the 63rd gate, and in relation to the 64th gate, which is the 3rd gate, which I will cover next, of the Crown Center. The 63rd gate represents the left brain, associating with the right side of the body, and the 64th gate is connected with the right brain, associating with the left side of the body. So those of you who are familiar with the concepts associated with the left brain know that it's slightly more masculine in nature. It is related to strategy, logic in particular, and the sort of concrete kind of logic and thinking, as opposed to the right brain, which is more associated with creativity and the feminine side of things. But I will talk more about the 64th next week. For the 63rd today, before I finish my comparison with the 64th gate, I want to also mention that these being the last 2 hexagrams of the I Ching, the Book of Changes, they are associated in a really interesting way, which speaks very much to the whole philosophy associated with the I Ching. The 63rd gate is called after completion, whereas the 64th gate is called before completion. And without going too deeply into that aspect of it, I will just say that it points to the cyclical nature of all of these hexagrams and how they mirror the cycles of nature. Also, they are exact opposites of each other in terms of both the yin and the yang lines, which I mentioned last week. So the 63rd hexagram, which we're focusing most on today, starts at the bottom with a yang line, solid all the way across, and then goes with a yin line, then a yang, then a yin, then a yang, then a yin. So there are exactly 3 of each, and it's basically every other one, whereas the 64th gate starts with a yin line on bottom, then yang, then yin, yang. So exactly opposite. And the extra interesting part about this that I only recently realized is that unlike other hexagrams, which are sort of mirror images of each other like this, they have, I mentioned the trigrams last week, which are usually associated with an element of some kind, although it's not just the 4 elements that you might be used to. Last week I said the bottom trigram was lake. So there are trigrams for both lake and water separately. They're slightly different. In the case of the 63rd hexagram, on bottom is fire and on top is water, as opposed to lake. It's a slightly different trigram. And when you flip all those around, basically fire and water are exact opposites of each other in terms of just the trigrams. So for the 64th, you do get water and fire. And I know that that might seem logical, it might seem almost obvious, perhaps, but believe it or not, that is not always the case when you exactly switch those yin and yang lines. One of the examples I can give to show you another pair of opposites is the very first 2 hexagrams, first and second, and the first hexagram is all yang lines, all the solid lines, and so it's heaven over heaven being exactly the same, and the second hexagram is all yin lines, and those are of course exactly opposite of each other, all of the yang lines turning to yin with the yin lines. And I had a video about this not too long ago as well. It's earth over earth. So just a little bit of background there. It just shows the beauty and elegance and intricacy and purposefulness or purpose behind these hexagrams and the way that they're arranged and ordered and how they relate to each other. So, focusing most on the 63rd hexagram, being strategic, slightly more masculine, and yet being in the crown center, there's a kind of alchemy that I hope was at least slightly evoked by the Redwood and by the poem that I shared with you. Alchemy being the way that we change one thing into another, purposefully, intentionally, and often the first thing that people connect with alchemy is changing lead into gold, but it's also changing almost anything into something else, but of course particularly using wisdom, chemistry comes from the word alchemy, so our knowledge of chemistry allows us to change one thing into another, in many cases, especially in these modern days, although I believe that it was probably also possible for ancient peoples to do that as well until that knowledge was lost. One of the ways that we have that is very representative of the 63rd hexagram, of using our wisdom to our advantage, basically, to help things go the way we would like, with intention, strategically, is astrology. And astrology has, of course, a lot of geometry. Human design is a type of astrology from which I am speaking about many of these gates. And with human design type of astrology and any kind of astrology, there is a lot of geometry involved, a lot of angles, a lot of symmetry, and I believe that knowledge was given to us by higher intelligence of some kind, and we receive that intelligence in probably many ways, but most easy to perhaps detect is through our crown center, and in answer perhaps to prayers as well. So if you picture fire below, water above, as the trigrams of the 63rd hexagram are arranged, you can see the alchemy of that, and it even speaks about that in the Book of Changes as well. By putting fire underwater, you boil it, and you can put many different things in that water if you would like, and transform them into something tasty, perhaps, something different. But you do have to use a lot of attention, strategy to start the fire in the first place, but also then to watch it and ensure that the water doesn't boil over, nor does the fire go out. You have to feed the fire in some way, and many of us just use our stoves nowadays, but for those stoves to have been invented in the first place, we had to get some kind of inspiration from some kind of higher intelligence, whether you perceive that intelligence as being sort of in the ether, in outer space, in the atmosphere, or the collective conscious, perhaps. That's, up to you to decide how you look at that. I believe even the Force, as spoken of in Star Wars, could be seen as something along those lines. But there is a symmetry, there is a pattern, there's a strategy in the way that we interact with that intelligence and the way that we use it and take that inspiration and put it into practice. So one of the things I wanted to share with you today is called Metatron's Cube. It is a very intricate geometric solid, and I got this on Etsy. Can't remember the name of the store now, but I love the way that it can be spun at least 3 different ways. Very much like a Merkaba, and I would definitely say that these geometric solids are related. Often people associate both the Merkaba and obviously this, well, because it's often called Metatron's Cube, with the Archangel Metatron. So you can get a really good feel with this 3-dimensional model of this shape, of the symmetry, the angles, and the ways that this is structured, similar to perhaps molecules, atoms, at least molecules probably in some cases. Nature, you can see the symmetry and the way that nature is built in such geometry. I mean, this kind of geometry does exist in nature and in our own bodies. There is an intelligence to it. And those of us who study astrology or even astronomy might see the parallels there as well, in the ways that the stars are used to navigate, to connect them to different points, to understand distances, and so forth. So I wanted to share that with you first. And then I also wanted to share another ASMR trigger with you that involves light, but involves something that could perhaps almost be made out of redwood, although this one is not technically, but it looks at least like wood, and it is a wand, of course. It can be lit up, lumos, and I wanted to mention one other sort of strategic way that inspiration can be used, and has been used for millennia, through the syllable om or aum. Oftentimes om is spelled om, but it can also be spelled aum, and it often is used to symbolize the crown chakra. I will share the symbol om with you in a moment from the Sanskrit written language, but I also wanted to share before I do that the significance of om being spelled aum is that there is a significance to it having 3 letters, and that is spoken of in the Vedas, specifically the Upanishads, which have no specified author. They're so ancient that it's just been recorded for so long, and the author or source is no longer known. But I believe that the first letter, A, they speak about the significance of each letter. I believe each letter can be associated with a gate of the crown center, and the one associated that I think is best associated with the 63rd gate, left brain, would be the first one, A. It has to do first with outer consciousness. And of course, by using strategy and intention and application in that left brain sort of way, we are definitely exercising outer consciousness. So, I will now trace the Om symbol on you several times. Feel free to watch it. Nox. I thank you so much for joining me today. Namaste, beloveds.